So I can hear you great. Awesome. Okay, we're gonna get
Okay.
started. First of all, thank you to everyone that decided to participate in this, to the field staff in the American Samoa and Marshall Islands, and of course the current volunteers as well as one of our alum as well. I'm excited to have all five of you on. And hello to everyone listening that can't talk, all the attendees. Hopefully, this webinar will be of great service to you, just figuring out, answering out any questions you might have about the programs. So, yeah, just to give you a proper introduction, my name is Alex Law. I am the Director of Recruitment here at WorldTeach, and I'm excited to share more about our programs in the Pacific Islands with you tonight. So just a few things we'll talk about tonight. We'll be discussing training, placements, culture, and the volunteer experience in the local classroom and broader community. And so uh, the people we have on staff, the people that we have on our panel tonight, we have the current field director of the American Samoa program, current field director of the Marshall Islands program, two current volunteers in the American Samoa, and one Marshall Islands alum. And so I'm excited to hear what they have to say tonight. So I'm going to pause every time I have to switch over slides real fast. So let's see. And then, one second. Sharing. So you should all see the agenda page. So just giving you a quick rundown of the agenda. First things first, we'll introduce the panelists and then go into arrival and orientation. After that, talk about the community that you'll be a part of, and after that, following that, immersion, community involvement, and then we'll talk about what it's like to be in the classroom, and then kind of conclude about the year overall. And then I'll talk about a few logistical things, application process, what you'll need in order to apply, logistics and fees, and then we'll do a quick Q&A at the end. So yeah, this is just a quick rundown. And then, first things first. Whoops. There. First things first, we have our two field directors, Rebecca Izquierdo and Vanessa King. Rebecca is, again, the current American Samoa field director, and Vanessa King is the current field director for the Marshall Islands. So can you guys say hi real fast?
Hi, this is Rebecca, the American Samoa Field Director.
And hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm the field director for our Marshall Islands program.
Awesome, cool. And then I will show, and real fast, our other panelists, the one alum and two volunteers. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves as well?
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm the alum from the Marshall Islands program. I was a teacher on an outer island tier in 2017 to 2018.
Hey, I'm Nick. I'm in American Samoa right now, teaching high school math.
Hi, I'm Bailey. I'm also in American Samoa, and I'm teaching 6th grade reading and science.
Awesome. Sorry, I keep pulling up notes and they keep getting in the way. Cool. So just to get started on a few questions, let's go back to this screen real fast. Can the field directors kind of elaborate, briefly elaborate what is your role within your program?
I'll go ahead and go first. Sorry, Vanessa. I feel like the role of the field director in American Samoa, it's really all-encompassing. We have a number of different facets that we deal with every day, whether that be with the home office or the Department of Education. But I think my primary role here is for volunteer support and addressing challenges that the volunteers may be having in their school or housing, as well as assisting volunteers navigate through the program. So my goal as a field director is to provide volunteers accessible, engaged support through various networks.
Awesome.
Go for it, sorry.
No, you have the floor.
I was just going to say that I agree with Rebecca that we sort of wear many hats. but that ultimately the goal is to help initially equip volunteers with the foundational skills that they need in order to be successful and as independent as possible, but also to be that person that volunteers can always come back to when they need additional support that they maybe don't know how to find, or to help them navigate different things that they haven't had to do yet.
Gotcha. Awesome. Can I ask real fast one quick thing, to Bailey, Nicholas, and Maddie real fast. Can you go over where you're placed in, where you're placed in your program, and how did you hear about WorldTeach, and why did you decide to join the program? Let me start with Bailey.
Okay, so let's see. I first heard about the program actually through my college. There's like a list of programs, I guess, that you could do abroad. And WorldTeach came up as one of them. So yeah, and I had a friend who did one of the semester-long programs, so she told me about that. And then I was just looking into the year-long programs and kind of was attracted to the Pacific Island programs. And then you asked where I live on the island.
Yes.
I live on the main island, and I live kind of towards the west side, and my village is named Maliimi, and I work like 5 minutes from here by bus in Pavai.
Cool. What about you, Nicholas? Same questions.
Right. So I found out about WorldTeach from just kind of searching around on Google, actually. So I knew I wanted to teach abroad somewhere, and I knew I wanted to go somewhere where it was really high need. And the last thing I was looking for was someplace where it'd be a unique cultural experience that wasn't really like anything I had done before. And yeah, American Samoa definitely fit that description. And then where I live in a village called Nu'uli, which is again kind of on the western side near where Bailey lives. And I teach right next door in a village called Tafuna, which is the biggest village on the island, but still not that big. I think it's like 11,000 or so.
Awesome. And Madeline? It's Madeline, right? I'm going to say that. Or do you go by Maddie?
Yeah, Madeline.
Madeline. All right, cool. Madeline, same questions, but just where were you in the Marshall Islands when you were doing WorldTeach, and how did you hear about WorldTeach, and why did you decide to join the program?
Okay, yeah. I first heard about WorldTeach actually through a friend who had completed a program in the Marshall Islands, and she just had a really great experience, and so I was looking for a place to go teach abroad, and based off of her experience, I looked into WorldTeach and it seemed all right. I chose the Pacific because it was a new region that I'd never been exposed to, and I'd heard it was really welcoming and opening place to be, so that really spoke to me. I was actually placed on an outer island. It's an atoll like an hour flight or 18-hour boat ride away from the capital atoll. It's about 900 people total in the whole atoll. My town was like 600 people. And I taught at a high school there, which was actually a boarding school, so we lived where we taught.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing some of your backgrounds and experiences. So yeah, let's just dive into the programs. First thing we'll talk about is every WorldTeach program starts with an orientation. And so every year program, the orientation is about 3 to 4 weeks long. And so I'm going to defer to the field directors and ask a few questions to them. Let me bring up the slide real fast just so you can see. There we go. Okay, and so first thing I'd like to ask the field directors, where do the volunteers stay during orientation, and what do they do?
Well, here in the Marshall Islands, we always have volunteers stay at one of the local schools during orientation.
Here in American Samoa, we sort of separate volunteers into groups and assign housing near the orientation site, so they're either able to walk to the orientation or take a short little bus ride.
Cool. So what are two or three of the most important topics that WorldTeach cohort will learn during orientation?
We focus a lot on bringing in educators and other experts from the Marshall Islands to talk about cultural competencies, as well as specifically what the education climate looks like in the Marshall Islands. WorldTeach is really great about providing a good foundation of education sessions, but then we also bring in the experts who've taught here, for years, who can also talk about what your everyday life in the classroom looks like.
Absolutely. Here in American Samoa, it's orientation is sort of viewed as an intensive crash course of what to expect here in American Samoa. We focus on learning about the culture, schools, communities, and of course safety and security. But focusing on classroom management, lesson planning, and the expectations that are expected from the volunteer, not only from the DOE, but also from WorldTeach.
Gotcha. So what do you think are some of the main benefits of orientation?
For us, I think that it's twofold. I think that it is an opportunity to really expose you to the local life and the local community, so that you can already start building those relationships and starting to grow an understanding of the local culture. And I also think it's a really important opportunity for you to build relationships with your cohort. While we emphasize building relationships with the people in your community first, we also recognize that it's really helpful to have the relationships of your cohort members who are also going through similar experiences for the first time as they're integrating and assimilating into a new culture.
I definitely agree with that, Vanessa. It really allows volunteers to acclimate and learn together what is expected before full immersion into life in American Samoa.
Yeah. So what do you think are some things that often surprise the cohort when they begin?
Here in the Marshall Islands, I think something that really surprises people is how diverse the Marshall Islands is. There are people from all around the world who have come here for work and to live. And a lot of times they end up at their schools teaching with teachers from Marshall Islands, from the Philippines, from Fiji, and as well as places like South Africa, that definitely surprise people who think, oh, this is a small island and in the middle of the ocean. What are all these? What's brought all of these people to this one place?
I actually asked my cohort recently about this, and I think the number one thing that was brought up was the fact that though this is considered developing, you still have access to so much variety here, whether it be food, Wi-Fi, things along those lines. You do still have access to it, even though the education system is developing.
Awesome. Yeah. So this last question, just for this part, I'd like to ask the volunteers: is there anything volunteers should bring or prepare for beforehand? So Nick, or Madeline, sorry, Madeline, if you want to respond to that, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah. I guess one thing I would recommend bringing is just a little bit of cash, because at least for the Marshall Islands, when you first get there, I know there was a couple volunteers in my cohort that ran into this problem. Like the ATMs will run out of money, or sometimes the bank is down, and so you can't access cash, and your card might not work at a lot of places, and it's a little while until you get your first stipend. So I think a lot of people sometimes don't think about that. And in terms for preparation, I think if you are really invested in learning the local language, going through the WorldTeach manual, language manual, just a little bit before you get to the country can actually help you make the most of the language sessions that you have, and or if you want to work with whatever teachers come in personally one-on-one later, would really help you be more prepared.
Yeah, so for American Samoa in terms of what to bring. Be a pretty long list, to be honest, but I think in general, just things that you would need living very close to the equator in a tropical environment. It's very humid, very sunny, also very rainy, a little of everything. So yeah, clothes like that. And then in terms of how to prepare, I would say you're definitely going to need to be patient over here because it is absolutely a different lifestyle. People always talk about island time and how things run at a different pace. So all of the fast-paced go that you might be used to in the U.S. hasn't really hit here so much. And yeah, that's just something that you might want to be ready for.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Nothing stands out as like something I absolutely wish I would have had during orientation. I guess bedding would be helpful, but they did tell us to bring that. But I think like the patience stretches to like even orientation adjusting. Like I think a lot of the mindset when you first get here is how am I going to adjust to the teaching and like my actual lifestyle here. But I think you also have to be patient with just like how crazy it is to arrive here, live in a house with all these people, and kind of get used to where you are. So even being patient with like how orientation runs, even before you start your actual teaching.
Yeah, great, awesome. No, I can definitely commiserate. I did an orientation program myself when I was a WorldTeach volunteer, and all those ring true for sure. So next thing I'd like to talk about is just adjusting into your new community. So here, let me bring up the next slide. You can see this new community. Awesome. We'll talk about housing, just resources, food, transportation, and so let's start off with I'll ask the volunteers a few things and then about insights into their community, and then I'll field directors a little bit about placements in general. So first question, so Bailey, can you tell me what is your living situation like? Housing, accommodations, commute, just in general, what is your community like, and maybe just share what's your typical diet or slash favorite food in your program.
Okay, well, my housing situation right now, I live with 2 other volunteers, and yeah, like our landlord Sally has been like a really direct contact in basically my entire experience living here. So like the first day we arrived here, she was here, and she's kind of like our person to go to for any needs we have or questions or anything like that, like regarding the house, but also just lifestyle in general here. And I think I mentioned this, but I live like maybe 5-6 minutes from the school that I actually work at. So it's not far from anywhere I'm going day to day. And I take the bus to and from school. The bus is only $1 like each way. So it's not a huge expense transportation wise, but I guess you kind of have to think about how often you're taking the bus. So for me, it's every day of the week for school and then like once or twice on the weekends. Resources wise, like I have decent Wi-Fi here, basically all the kind of typical things you'd have in a house. There's nothing that's like missing that I have at home that I like miss. I guess I don't have a microwave, but I've made do without it. But nothing is like that different. I think I expected maybe to have to adjust way more to what my housing situation would be like, but it really is not that different from home. In terms of food, that has been a little bit of an adjustment because it's just unpredictable, like when you go to the stores, what kind of food you're going to find. So for the most part, like normal American food can be found in the marts or like the larger shopping centers. It's just a little harder to get to some of the stores that have more variety. And yeah, my favorite food, like I just like variations of vegetables, and I've for the most part been able to find that. So that pretty much covers it.
Cool. What about you, Nick?
Right, so I live in a house with 2 other volunteers. One of them teaches at the same school as me. And we actually got kind of lucky in terms of transportation because there is a volunteer from 2 years ago who is still teaching here on the island. she has a car and she drives to school every day, and our school is kind of on the way, so she drives us, which is nice. That's just in the mornings, and on the way back we take a bus. But again, it's a short bus ride, only like 10 minutes or so, and $1, like Daly said. It's pretty fine. And yeah, the buses they can be entertaining in their own right. They're painted in very interesting ways. A lot of times they have flames on the side, and
Loud
the bus
music.
driver is always bumping some jams really loud.
Oh.
Yeah, and then in terms of food, yes, like Bailey said, it can be really hit or miss depending on where you are, what store you go to. Some days of the week you might be able to find a decent mix of fresh vegetables and fruit, and other days it might just be eggs and bread. But then there are bigger stores where you can get pretty much most of the things that you would want in the U.S. Yeah, I haven't had any major problems with food really. And in terms of resources, yeah, I think Bailey covered it. I was a bit surprised. Like, they have most things that we have in the U.S. in terms of the house. Like, it's got Wi-Fi. I mean, our Wi-Fi is metered, so we have a certain amount of gigabytes per month, but it's still Wi-Fi nonetheless, and it's ample for us. And then, yeah, we have a stove, we have microwave as of now, and hot water, which comes and goes. But overall, it hasn't been a problem at all.
Awesome. And what about you, Madeline?
Okay, so my experience was a little bit different because I was placed on an outer island. It's a little more rural, so I'm just speaking from that perspective. I was lucky in terms of the housing, since it was a boarding school. There's teacher housing, so all teachers that are not from the Jalowit Atoll stay in teacher housing, which is on campus, so I didn't really have a commute. I would just walk across the field to my classroom. There's no air conditioning. The water is rain-caught water, and a lot of times the pump was broken, so it's a lot of carrying buckets to flush and bucket showers, but there's generally power, which was nice. And so we had refrigeration as well, which was a nice perk. Yeah, that's the housing and the commute. In terms of food, the food that you could access on island, there's lots of small shops that would sell things like rice, canned meats, spam, canned tuna, canned vegetables. But honestly, my favorite was just getting to know people and getting access to the local food. So there's a lot of opportunity to eat a lot of fish, coconuts, breadfruit is like my absolute favorite, pandanus, and that kind of stuff. So if you're interested and you make it known that you want to try Marshallese food and you're really interested in learning how they cook it, then everyone is more than happy to invite you over to dinner and just show up at your house with a whole thing of bananas, etc. So that was my experience. So you're not going to have access to normal goods that you'd be used to in the U.S. on island per se, but I never went hungry or felt super wanting.
Awesome. So next thing I'd like to ask is just to the field staff, if you can, we just heard about, 2 current volunteers and 1 alum, just about what their living situations was like. And I'm sure, every living experience was different from the next, but just across the board, what do you believe are, some basic resources that all volunteers will have in their community? What are some of the basic resources all volunteers will have in the community?
Because we have both placements on the outer atolls as well as on the main island, it's really difficult to say all sites have. Because one of the things that makes the Marshall Islands really unique is that we have very sort of isolated placements where my volunteers check in with me every week over the radio, because there isn't consistent cell service or internet. Whereas there's also other sites where you have access to cell service, to internet, to running water, to electricity. On other sites, you have solar electricity, you have some running water. So it really depends on the kind of placement that you request and what your interest is in.
Absolutely. American Samoa is similar in that aspect also, depending if you're on Tutuila, the main island, or the outer islands, that will tell you what resources you'll have access to here on the main island. As Bailey and Nick mentioned, there is transportation Monday through Saturday, typically 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. In March, you can get to fairly easily. If you're looking for something specific, you will have to, you might have to travel a little bit further. On the main island, phone service is found everywhere. On the outer islands, that is intermittent, depending on where you're located. But yes, overall, on the main island, you have access to many things, while on the outer islands, it tends to be a bit more limited.
Gotcha. Can either of you comment on, just safety overall, in in both of your programs?
For American Samoa, safety is, we are fairly safe out here. Of course, as you live anywhere, you do have to be aware of your surroundings and so on. But generally speaking, all of our volunteers, I feel fairly safe. We do have one little issue with dogs that volunteers have to get used to dealing with on a regular basis, as they are a bit more territorial out here. But that's really the only safety issue that we run into regularly.
Gotcha.
And I would agree. We also, dogs are different here. They're not pets so much as protection, and that is something that a lot of volunteers from the West tend to have to get used to. We also in orientation are very vigilant about doing boat safety training, water safety training. We have a visit from a doctor who goes over a lot of the common illnesses that, while common here, are not necessarily common in a lot of the climates that our volunteers come from. But yeah, we are super vigilant in terms of making sure that that our volunteers feel safe and secure well in their placements, both in the outer islands as well as in Majuro at the capital.
Awesome. I like hearing the rooster in the background. That's
Yeah, sorry, that's us.
That's part of Samoa.
no, that's fine. It leads into the next part of this pretty well. Just immersion and community involvement. And dogs and roosters I did a program in Costa Rica. They were par on course from my experience in Costa Rica as well. So, yeah. So let me bring up the next slide real fast. You see this? So the next part of this is immersion and community involvement. So we'll be asking the volunteers and the alum just about what it was like to dive into the community that they were living in. And so first thing I'd like to ask all of you is just how did you get involved in your community? How did you spend your free time? Weekends or after school hours and things like that. So yeah, if you want to get started with the question, Nick, you want to get started with that?
I'd love to. So I actually got pretty involved with the football team at my high school almost immediately, and that was very easy. I just walked up to the coach and I was like, "Hey, I played football in high school. I'd love to help out," and then they were more than happy to have me. And so that was great because it really introduced me to a lot of people at the school right away, both teachers and students. So it kind of gave me like an additional kind of piece of respect that otherwise I would not have had from the students. And then I also just had a blast doing it. All the kids were great, and it also helped that we went undefeated and won the championship. So a lot of good on that. So that was mostly after school and then in the community. And another way that a lot of people get involved here is by going to church, because American Samoa actually has a huge Christian community. I think 98% of the population here is Christian, and it's something that pretty much everyone does every Sunday. So that's really a great way to get involved, just to go to church, even if you're not religious. Like they'll still love you for it and invite you out to lunch and stuff. So it's a good way to get integrated.
Awesome. What about you, Bailey?
Yeah, I'd say like I kind of see it as two separate communities. I think my home life and meeting my landlord and meeting her family and going to church, like Nick said, is like one community, and they've been really supportive. I don't see them all the time, like since I'm kind of in my own separate house and doing my own thing. It's not like daily we interact with them, but it's kind of like having like a family on the same land that you live on. And then school-wise, like I work at an elementary school, so I feel like the after-school involvement and clubs and stuff like that, there aren't as many, I would say, as high school. But one of the ways I kind of got involved, kind of randomly, honestly, I was at the beach one day on a Saturday, and I just started talking to this woman who was there with her kids, and it turns out she lives in my village, and she was looking for just someone to tutor her kids and just kind of like someone just to become friends with, honestly. So I spent a lot of time with her, and then through her, I've met all of her friends on the island, and I guess that's kind of a community in and of itself. So I would say there are ways to get involved, but sometimes it's kind of less conventional than you would think. It's not just handed to me at school. It's more just finding opportunities outside of it, even in your free time.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. A lot of little ways to get involved or find.
Can I go? Okay, this is Madeline. I think I would just echo what with getting first and foremost with the truth.
Wait, Madeline? Hello?
I think it would help if Bailey and Nick muted theirs, since there might be.
Okay. Yeah, could you guys mute yours fast? Oh, there you go. Cool. Can you try one more time? Sorry about that.
Okay. Oh my gosh, so much better. Okay. Is it better for you guys?
Yes, it's super clear.
Okay. So, I think they've touched a lot of the ways that I got involved in my community. The biggest thing I would say, and that I've always told other people, what really helped me going to Bailey's way of like unconventional ways of getting involved is just being like present and like around in your community. Because like what I've found is people aren't necessarily going to like come walk the 5 minutes, like pick you up and tell you something is happening. But if you're sitting out at the dock chatting with someone, or sitting under a tree like talking to your student, and you're around when things are happening, that's how I always like built my connections. They would just invite me to come along to something because they were passing and would see me, and then through that I would keep those relationships going. I got involved with the church as well, even though I'm not particularly religious, and that was a great way to meet a lot of people, youth and women. And I was also heavily involved with the women's exercise group on island, which was really awesome. They met every single day, Monday through Friday, for an hour to do, I don't know, like the cha-cha slide and other types of things in the community center to work out. So that was a really good way to get involved.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It was.
Awesome. Yeah. No, everyone, like I've read a lot of reviews and reports, and just it's always fun to read about how everyone decides to get involved, in what ways they get involved and things like that. So next thing I'd like to ask, it would be to the field directors, just as volunteers begin to assimilate into their local cultures, do you notice, if there are any successful strategies that you recommend, anything like that? What are some things volunteers should know about island culture that would really just, enable them to maximize their immersion inside their community?
Something I think that's really important to know about Marshallese culture is that people are very shy, and they like to observe sort of first. So a lot of people won't necessarily make the first move, but once you're in, you're in. And so sort of going back to what Madeline said, I really encourage volunteers to put themselves in the way of opportunity. Show up to things. You are more than welcome to invite yourself to stuff, and people will be so excited if you do. Another thing that I really encourage folks to do is, even if learning language is not your strength, do what you can. Show people that you're putting the effort in to learn language. It opens a lot of doors. And if you do end up being really good at language, it also opens up opportunity to have relationships with a lot of folks that normally wouldn't be able to have relationships with foreigners. And a lot of times that also means you're able to build relationships with people who maybe didn't have the opportunity to get a lot of education, who weren't able to learn English on the front end. And so it exposes you to a lot more folks, and I think really enriches your experience as a WorldTeach volunteer.
Cool.
Yes, I agree with all of those. I urge volunteers here initially when you initially arrive here and are at your site, just say.
Hello? Did we lose her? Rebecca? Hello? Hello? I can't tell if that's me or... Can someone else speak? I can't.
Yeah, I'm not hearing her either.
Oh, okay, jeez, I was... Ooh.
Yeah, no, it's not just you in the void.
Oh, I think Rebecca lost connection. It says offline here. Oh, I apologize to all of you listening. Just sometimes island internet isn't always the most reliable, and so I guess we'll have to continue without her. But I think Vanessa did great answering the question as was, and I think you can kind of cross apply it to what Rebecca was trying to say.
Yeah, I think too, one thing, sorry, that I would probably add is that I really encourage volunteers to find cultural like models to follow. Because another big thing that I found both here in the Marshall Islands as well as when I lived in the Kingdom of Tonga, which is in the South Pacific, is that people are not going to call you out if you're doing something culturally inappropriate because they're trying to help you save face, but they'll talk about it later. And so something that's really important is for volunteers to find cultural models to follow so that they're able to go, oh, no one else is doing this right now, or no one else is wearing that, so maybe I need to go change so that I'm appropriate in following those cultural norms. And that way it's showing people that you're putting the effort into wanting to honor their culture. And that often helps become a gateway into them wanting to share more of their culture with you because they know that you'll treat it respectfully.
Awesome. Yeah, that's definitely good input. It's also kind of just funny hearing you talk about how they'll mention it later. You know, it can kind of be a bit gossipy at times. But let's see. Rebecca, are you back, Rebecca? All right, not hearing her. All right, so the webinar continues without her. We'll have to march on. So next thing we'll talk about is just being in the classroom. So let me pull up the next slide real fast. Show screen. Switch it over. There we go. Okay, so in the classroom. Oh. 1 second. And so sorry. I kind of just had to pull up the notes real fast. So next part of this, we're going to talk about just being in the classroom. And so I know from my own time spent teaching abroad that the impact of my students in the school on my experience was just, immeasurable. And so I have a lot of fond memories of being a teacher in my community. And so I'd just like to start by asking all the volunteers and the alum in this webinar, just, what was your day-to-day teaching schedule at the school, and what sort of resources did you have in your classroom? And so if we want to get started with Madeline, if you'd like to answer that.
Sure. So I taught high school. I taught 10th grade life science and 12th grade English writing. So I was teaching 5 classes a day with 2 free periods and a lunch. I taught around 35 to 38 kids in each class. Resources wise, I had a chalkboard and a whiteboard. I was in different classrooms. I didn't have my own classroom. I moved around. Chalk, paper, pens, pencils, stapler, but it was very basic. That's about it. And sometimes the school would run out of paper or run out of chalk or run out of expo markers or the kids would use up their notebook and didn't have any more notebooks. So it was kind of the basics in terms of the things you had to get creative and use things from the island or try to ship things in from the capital if you wanted anything over that.
Gotcha.
I think that's it.
Meg, how about you? What's your day-to-day teaching schedule like, and what are some of the resources you've had?
Right, so like I mentioned, I'm teaching math at a high school, and we have a block schedule. So we have 6 total classes, but we only teach 4 classes a day, except on Monday and Friday, where we actually only teach 3 classes a day. And then, well, sorry, I should back up. You're supposed to have 5 classes and a prep period, but there is an extreme teacher shortage here, so my prep period is next, so I have 6 classes. But it's been manageable. In terms of resources, I run a very bare bones classroom, but it's kind of how I like it as a math teacher. I'm good with the chalkboard and the whiteboard, and whenever I need to like branch out and do some sort of project, like there's always plenty of opportunity for the kids to come in with posters or things like that. But in terms of other teachers on the island who might be teaching like science or English or something like that, depends on the school and the classroom. I know some of them have smart boards or projectors or something where they can do PowerPoints. Yeah, they could probably talk more about that. But yeah, at the school, you're not going to have ample resources, but you will have enough to teach.
Awesome, and great to hear that you kind of helped accommodate, as you mentioned, the teaching shortage. Yeah, and so Bailey, what about you?
Yeah, so I teach at the largest elementary school on the island, I believe. So I feel like maybe my day-to-day schedule is different than other volunteers who are teaching my same level, but I teach level 6 and I teach reading in the morning, and reading is kind of like English, language, writing, and reading combined. So you teach that for an hour and a half, and then your classes switch 6 times. So I teach science 6 times, and yeah, we stick to that schedule every day for the most part. And then resources wise, yeah, I mean, definitely minimal. I use my laptop if I'm going to like show a PowerPoint or something like that, but kind of similar to Nick, just really the chalkboard, the whiteboard, some notebooks. Like midway through our first quarter, they brought us some textbooks, which has been helpful, I'd say, for reading, just because our like resources in terms of even printing or having kind of a mass supply of something to read that like doesn't really exist. So you kind of have to find ways to project like a large text for a lot of students without printing that or having like a bunch of copies. So the textbooks have helped with that. But I'd say overall it's still quite simple. Yeah, it's like finding ways to teach a large class but not have a lot of resources. And for science too, with experiments and things, it's kind of like using recycled things or having them bring stuff from home is what I have them do, just to kind of still make lessons creative with very little to work with.
And just a couple more things I want to add real quick. So yeah, for textbooks, like Billy mentioned, you might have enough for all your students, you might not. So for me, I have enough. Well, so I teach geometry and algebra. For geometry, I have enough for all the kids in my class to have one, but they have to stay in the classroom. There's not enough for them to take them home. For algebra, I only have like 10 textbooks. So you can't really assign work from the book because most of the kids don't have their own textbook. If they do, it's usually because they bought it themselves. And from my experience, those are usually the kids who actually need the textbook the least. But yeah, so you'll need to get creative in terms of thinking of ways to get the material to them, or thinking of homework or things like that. And also printing was a big one. So at my school, the math department has their own printer, which is very helpful because we print a lot of things. But then for the other departments, they all share one printer, which it's not the most reliable. You need to send it to the secretary the day before, and whatever you ask for may or may not get printed, and that's just something you kind of need to be prepared for. So you might have the copies you need. You might have one copy. You'll probably have to get creative.
Cool. What sort of cultural challenges did you encounter in the classroom? Bailey, why don't you start off with that question?
Okay. I mean, many. I'm not sure I could. Yeah. Let's just start with the fact that I think the hardest for me was that when I think of school and education and kind of the importance of it, that just doesn't really translate for a lot of people here and a lot of their families. I don't think the priority is, go to school today and try to get straight A's or something like that. So I think the challenge was being able to teach passionately about subjects and kind of like instill the importance of education to them while also understanding that their home life or kind of culture suggests other things that are sometimes more important. And that seems kind of counter to American culture. And I think in a lot of ways it is. But I think that was kind of my initial challenge, and in some ways still is. It's going into a classroom and understanding that for them, it might not mean the same thing that it means for me or it meant for me when I was their age in school. And then I'd say another cultural challenge, just in terms of kind of working among Samoan staff and local teachers. I think a lot of them are really respectful, and I'm lucky in that way. I've built great relationships with the teachers at my school, but I think in some ways you're not always greeted with that same enthusiasm that you may expect. So you'll have some teachers who, want to know where you're from and want to know about your life and kind of want to support you day to day, and that's amazing. But then you also have people who kind of aren't interested in getting to know you, or maybe don't like the way I do something because I'm American or because I don't really understand, how things are typically done or something like that. So I think the challenge is like the gap between those two reactions to me being here.
Gotcha. What about you? What about you, Madeline?
Yeah. So I think the greatest cultural challenge for me was the fact that the materials I was given were not like culturally relevant or accessible. So the textbooks are just very off and have references that just don't resonate with the students. And you also have to think about what's meaningful for your students and how they want to use that information in the future. And a lot of times what you're being told to do from a certain curriculum standpoint or something, it doesn't translate to what your students need. So for me, finding that balance of every day coming in, I'm teaching science, and I know from statistics that 2/3 of my students are going to go back to their home island, which is even more isolated than where we were, and never go off anywhere further. Like, what kind of good information can I give them that's going to help them there so that they stay engaged and they see the importance? But you had to do a lot of that heavy lifting on your own because the textbooks were just really out of touch with the students' cultural needs and understandings.
What about you, Nick?
Yeah, so I think Bailey hit it right on the head in terms of how the community values education. It really does depend on families. So there are some students, some families who you see like the potential path they could follow. They could graduate high school with good grades, and then because it is American Samoa, they are U.S. nationals, which means they can study in the U.S. without any sort of visa. So the opportunity is there for them, but it can be frustrating at times because a lot of them just don't see that path. It doesn't occur to them at all. And yeah, like she said, there are some students, some families who they see school as something they have to do, but they don't really see why it is important to do. It's more of just some obligation. And it doesn't really help that in American Samoa, in terms of elementary, so from K to 8, it's actually impossible to fail to get held back a grade. So, and the students know this, so they don't see the reason to study or to learn because it doesn't affect them at all up until high school. And then come high school, they do have to pass, and that causes some problems for them because they haven't learned the basics. But yeah, so that is definitely a major issue for me, especially with teaching math. So I'm teaching, like I said, algebra and geometry. And I have some students, not many, but some students in my algebra class who can't multiply or divide, and it's really disheartening to see that they've gone so far without learning the basics like that.
Yeah, we understand. Wouldn't be teaching without a few obstacles. But yeah, I think you can find that all across some of our programs, and so yeah, it's not the best thing, but it's good that you guys are doing the program and trying to do your best to kind of curb that. And so yeah, thank you for just sharing a little bit about your experiences, your day-to-days, and some of the things you've run into and how you're trying to combat that. So next thing I'll bring up is just yeah, just you guys are, let's see, the year's almost over. Double question mark. You guys are at the halfway point now, or a little bit past the halfway point now. I think you all just did the your midterm service, and so yeah, I just want to ask you a few questions just to reflect about some of the things you've been through already. So just to all the volunteers and our alum as well, just what are some things that surprise you about the experience or about yourself? Madeline, what do you think?
I think I was honestly surprised with how easily I felt that I melded into my community by the halfway point or the end of my year. I don't know, I'm just always surprised by how generous and welcoming and opening these people can be. And I come in as a cultural baby and I'm like, take care of me. And everyone just swooped in to help me be as successful as possible. So I was expecting it to be much more of a challenge, but just how seamlessly I fit in there was really surprising.
What about you, Nick?
So I guess in terms of something about myself, I consider myself a very laid back and patient person. I'm not always the most assertive or confrontative, but teaching here, you definitely need to establish some authority. That's not to say you need to be aggressive with students, but you definitely can't just sit back and expect the class to run smoothly. You do have to take control. And it isn't something that I would have said would mesh with my personality, but I have adjusted and things are definitely going better than I would have expected.
And you, Bailey?
Yeah, I'd say personally, I mean, coming here, I definitely was not a patient person, nor would I say I was very flexible. But just across my time here, you kind of have to force yourself to be, but I'm amazed at how I have become that way. Some of us were even talking when we left the island for Christmas break, things I encountered when I was in the States that before I left would have driven me mad were not even problems. Things, just kind of this patient, flexible mindset has kind of woven into everything in my life. And I think that just speaks to kind of how transformative your experience is in the classroom. You kind of have to learn this as you go. But I think in a lot of ways, even when we were just talking about the cultural challenges and things we faced when we first started working, even looking at those things now, I feel like we have a lot of resources personally to be able to deal with those challenges differently. And I think, at the start of this, if someone would have told me I would have learned all of this, I wouldn't have believed them.
Yeah. Thank you guys for just being very candid for that one. We really appreciate that. Just next thing I'd like to ask you is just what are some of the most vital skills or perspective that you've taken or that you took or have taken so far away from your experience? Nick, want to start with you?
Yeah, so kind of similar to what Dave was saying. Like, like by nature, when you're living on an island, you need to be very content with what you have and very patient because your resources are limited. It's a small island. It's a small community. Like you need to be flexible and you need to be able to get along with most people. So I think just yeah, I guess just being more relaxed in general and being comfortable with what you have, not always trying to get things that may not be attainable.
What about you, Bailey?
I would say, I mean, a lot of things. I would say, um, when you kind of think about what your goals are, like as a teacher, like committing to a program like this, you're like, wow, I would love to see my students change in this way or feel, this way about this subject or however you kind of see success in a certain sense of you as a volunteer doing your job. I think coming to terms with you might see that in a different way. And as Nick was saying, like being content with that, like you might want your class average to go up by 15% and it never does. But if you see one student, grow a ton over the course of a quarter, like seeing that change as worth the entire experience rather than, kind of working towards these other things that may or may not come to be in your time, I feel like is the most rewarding way to look at it kind of full picture wise. And that's definitely something I've started to do.
You, Madeline?
So I think honestly one of the greatest skills I took from my time was the language skills, which I am now using in a job here and has helped me get a job here in the capital. Just the Marshallese language skills that I was able to grow on my island. And I think another skill that really helped me was just whenever you come to a point of frustration or like you just don't understand what's going on, I really learned through my time on Jowett to like seek understanding first and try to understand what is motivating them culturally or personally or whatever to act that way. And then like you find that 9 times out of 10 your frustration kind of dissipates once you try to really understand what's motivating their actions. Why are students always coming late? Like it's not that they just don't care about my class, it's because of all of this other stuff factored into that. So those 2 things were really great for me.
Awesome. So I guess last question for all of you regarding this topic. What have been your favorite aspects or memories of living in the Pacific Islands? Let's start with you, Madeline.
Oh man, by and far my favorite memories were just there's like these traditional canoes here in the Marshall Islands, and they still use them a lot for transportation in my atoll because gas is very expensive. And so weekends going across the lagoon with my family on the atoll or on the canoe to a small island, picnicking, learning how to cook all the food, eating, just talking, having a good time. So time spent with the community members that I built relationships with and being on the water. I mean, you're on an island.
It's a good answer. I like that one a lot. What about you, Bailey?
Yeah, there's so much I could say. In terms of school, there have been like some of the best moments when my kids have shown me their true colors and revealed to me their insane personalities. My homeroom in particular, they love dance battles. So like I have witnessed multiple dance battles with my class versus other classes. Like I've seen things I never thought I would see, but it's just like incredible. Like it's so hilarious and so amazing. And just kind of seeing my kids become more comfortable with me and then our classroom environment and then seeing how they really are, I think has been awesome. And then in terms of just living on the island, like the just natural beauty of this place, I don't think you could ever really get sick of. So we've had amazing, especially weekend adventures where we've just gone to so many different beaches and gone on hikes and just seen some of the most remote but most beautiful places ever. So that's been awesome.
Cool. And you, Nick?
Yeah, so in addition to the kind of beaches and nature stuff that Dave was talking about. I think some of the moments that I value most are my experiences with the football team, coaching, whether it was just like the actual practice itself or hanging out with coaches. Throughout the course of the season, I spent a lot of time, Monday through Saturday, sometimes Sunday. So I got to know them all very well, and yeah, it was great to build those relationships and get closer, and then finishing by winning it all helps a lot too. So it was definitely an experience I won't forget.
Awesome. Yeah, those all amazing experiences, especially the kind of reminded me of my schools a little bit. And so yeah, thank you all so much for sharing your stories and your experiences. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners also really appreciate it as well. And so next thing I'd like to do before I open the floor to the Q&A is just go over a few quick logistical things. So let me see, pull up this next slide. Awesome. So yeah, I'll just go over just the application process and requirements. I'm sure some of you already started applications and are going through it right now, but just in case you haven't yet, participants in WorldTeach programs must be a native level English speaker. And so what that means is you don't have to be from the US or from an English speaking country necessarily, but if you have a proven level of English proficiency, a native level English proficiency, then you'd be eligible to do our programs. And so the way you would show that is via your personal statement, and then interviewing with me as well, and just getting a chance, giving me the opportunity to talk to you a little bit and just have a conversation with you. And then of course you would need a bachelor's degree by the time of your departure, and then of course be highly flexible, mature, and demonstrated interest in global engagement, education, and intercultural learning. And so to fill out an application, you just go to our website, worldteach.org, and then you would submit a resume and personal statement and a reference as well, and then you would go through a quick interview process with me. And so one thing I put right here is the TEFL certification. Basically, it's an optional certification, but if you are interested in pursuing international education as a career, then it's definitely something I highly recommend you get, because some private teaching academies in some countries require that you have it, and other countries is not a requirement, but it can definitely help you get like a higher salary if you're interested in just working in another country in another school. And so yeah, it's a very valuable form certification. It can take you pretty far in some cases. And so program dates and deadlines for both Pacific Island programs, the deadline is May 1st, and we operate on a rolling admissions basis. So, typically it takes, say it takes you a week or so to complete the application process, and then we'll interview you, and that completes your application in its entirety. And then, I would say the whole process takes about 3 to 4 weeks total, and including the time it takes to make an admissions decision. And so, next thing I'll bring up is just logistics and fees. And so they're pretty similar across the board. Marshall Islands and American Samoa are very similar in this regard, in that both programs are fully funded programs. The only cost is the $500 security deposit, and which you will get back upon successful completion of the program. And then so while you're there, you'll get a living stipend, housing is covered, insurance as well, pre-departure preparation, visa assistance, and of course orientation and support throughout the duration of the program as well. I'm going to bring up the next one. I don't want to repeat myself because it's pretty much the same for American Samoa as well. I guess the only notable difference is that regarding housing, American Samoa, as you heard, both the current volunteers that we had on this panel live with other volunteers, whereas in the Marshall Islands, that is also a possibility. You might live with other volunteers, but you might also live with a host family. And so that's something that we do not have in the American Samoa that we do have in the Marshall Islands. And so if that's something that interests you, then I recommend you check out the Marshall Islands program if you want to live with a host family. But otherwise, very similar in terms of structure and things that you would get as a volunteer. You'll have 2 great field directors, and Vanessa and Rebecca there to help you out, and support from WorldTeach's home office as well throughout the application process for visas and just getting ready for the program. And so let's see. Last slide is just a quick Q&A. So the way this works, you should, for all attendees listening right now, you should be able to type in questions on your little GoToWebinar app. And let's see if I can bring it up. All right, let's see. I'm not seeing anything yet. Oh, so okay, someone just asked a question. So do all our let's see. Bailey, Nick, and Madeline, you can still hear me, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Yes. So Sarah Wood asked, when did you depart for the American Samoa start orientation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
When did you depart for the American Samoa, and when did you start orientation?
Okay, so we arrived here July 30th, I believe. And orientation, I think, started like maybe 2 days after that. So we had one day to kind of settle in, get used to life here, and then we started like right away.
But the person running orientation was obviously very realistic with understanding that we all just moved halfway across the globe, so the adjustment will take some time. So they're not expecting a lot out of you in the first couple of days. They really eased into it in terms of orientation. And the first few days are pretty laid back, and they're mostly just getting acclimated to the island.
Gotcha. And so someone just asked, first of all, they said, thank you. This has been very informative. So just want to let you guys know that she's been very complimentary of everyone's responses. So one person is asking, what is the process like for determining placement for the American Samoa, especially in terms of subject area and grade levels? And how much say do volunteers have in what they teach? And so would the field director like to field this question?
Absolutely. For site placement, there is a questionnaire that is sent out to you that you fill out that is gives us a general idea of what we're looking at on your side. I would like to make it a little bit more specific for this year to give you a little bit of a better idea of what village life actually is versus outer islands. We also work with the Department of Education to see what subjects are needed and what aligns with your past experience.
Yeah, awesome. And the last question she was asking is, how much say do volunteers have in what they teach? And so I guess anyone can really answer this just based on their experience. I think the volunteers, if any of you want to put in, if any of you have a response to that, how much flexibility, how much creativity are you given to kind of, inject your own personality and ideas into the lessons you're teaching?
Well, I would say, and maybe it depends on your school. I'm actually not sure in terms of what subject you're assigned, but for me, like in college, I was an English major, but then when I got here and spoke with my vice principal, she was like, oh, we need a science teacher. Can you teach science? So a lot of it, I think, is also just whatever they need. I'm not sure it's as much of like what I would feel most comfortable teaching, but I think maybe that could be different across schools or like age levels, like grade levels.
Yeah, I guess there's like a couple ways to answer this. If you're talking about in terms of like freedom over what subject or what grade level, then we do have a little bit of choice on that. Like we fill out a pre-service questionnaire that basically lists your preferences, what grade you want, what grade you're comfortable with, and what subjects you'd be comfortable teaching. But obviously you're not always going to get what you want. But you do have some say in that part of it. And then, yeah, like Billy mentioned, it depends on the school. So you might get placed somewhere at a certain school, but then after that, it's really just up to the school with what you teach.
Gotcha.
Yes. Actually, with the school, when we are working with the Department of Education, they give us a list of what needs they need or what subject needs they need. And we work with looking at the volunteers. We try to align that with their university education and past experience. So we really try to work with you to make you as comfortable as possible in those terms, but also, as Bailey mentioned, being adaptable in those situations is also really important, because sometimes we just can't perfectly match you.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's something I also bring up during the application process, which is, a lot of people ask about placements, and, I tell them that we prioritize the needs of our partners and school districts in the countries we serve in, but also we do take into consideration, your input, your preferences as well, and try to create the best fit or the best match. So yeah, I definitely can understand, the concern about it, but as I mentioned, priority is the needs of the partners, and then we'll take into consideration you as well. Next question someone asked, I think this is directed, they asked two questions, one about the TEFL online course. I can answer that one directly because I do want to ask a clarifying question, but you can't respond here, so I'll follow up via email regarding that one. But they asked another question. You mentioned a former volunteer who still lives there, referring to you, Madeline. Is this easily manageable? Like, easily managed? Is it easy? I guess, is it easy to do that?
Well, one thing I will say before Madeline jumps in, since she obviously has the most experience in that regard, is that we actually have a number of former WorldTeach, both field directors and volunteers, who have opted to stay or have come back again years later.
Yeah, so I would say there's lots of people here who kind of got their start in the Marshall Islands through WorldTeach, and then kind of through meeting people while teaching. They stayed on either with the public school system and continued teaching, or branched out and pursued other interests, working for environmental NGOs, working for clam farms, working for the International Office of Migration. They're everywhere around here.
Through the UN, yeah.
Through the UN. So it's definitely easy. And once you meet people and build relationships, they want people to stay. So if you want to stay, you can make it happen.
Awesome. I didn't know that. So that's really cool. I'm glad to hear that. So that was the last question, it seems. The floor is still open, but otherwise I'm not seeing anything else. I will, as I mentioned to the one person that asked the question that we weren't able to address, I will address that in a follow-up. But otherwise, I think that was it. So yeah, thank you again so much to everyone that participated today. I really appreciate I really appreciate you guys just taking the time out of your day to do this. And so yeah, I think that's no more questions. That's it. And so if you have for those of you listening, if you have any follow-up questions, anything you didn't think of, feel free to just shoot me an email. I'll open this last page real fast. This last slide. Yeah, feel free to shoot me an email. You can read about alumni reviews on our Go Overseas page. We have plenty of reviews for both the Marshall Islands and the American Samoa. And as I already mentioned, if you're interested in applying, then the deadline to apply is May 1st. And so otherwise, yeah, I think that concludes this webinar. Thank you so much to the field directors, Rebecca and Vanessa. And thank you so much to our two current volunteers in the American Samoa, Nick and Bailey, and thank you to Madeline, one of our Marshall Islands alum.
Thank you for organizing, Alex. Have a good day.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Hey, have a good one, guys.